Hello and welcome to the TID Water and Power Podcast. I'm your host, Constance Anderson, and on this month's episode, we're discussing TID's investments in its electric infrastructure. TID's mission is to serve safe and reliable water and power, and ensuring that our electric infrastructure is properly maintained to preserve reliability is vital. But there's a balance planning for current reliability and future growth, especially with new large customers, new subdivisions, and the push towards electrification. On this episode, I'm joined by TID Assistant General Manager of Electrical Engineering and Operations, Manjot Gill, to discuss how we plan for future load growth, the considerations made for capital projects, and what projects the district is currently working on to maintain reliability. Manjot, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this podcast. It's a very important thing for me here at the district, and excited to give some more information out.
Awesome. So we were fortunate enough to have you on back in 2021 when you were sharing with us TID's efforts related to wildfire mitigation, and that was way back in episode 6. But for those listeners who are new to the TID Water and Power Podcast, why don't we start with a little bit about your background at TID?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I joined the district in 2006 as an electrical engineer. And through my progress here at the organization, my career was mainly in the line engineering sector, where it's mainly transmission and distribution sides of the house. And so I eventually got an opportunity to become a department manager. And then in 2017, became an assistant general manager of electrical engineering and operations.
Awesome. So you are currently the AGM of Electrical Engineering and Operations, as you just mentioned. And what sort of responsibilities come with that title?
Just as the title definitely says, it's in planning and engineering our electric sector, and then our operations. So that's for maintaining and operating our electrical grid. That's kind of the main core focus of where our group resides in.
Okay. And let's take a quick look at that group. So under the Electrical Engineering and Operations Administration, can you kind of give us a breakdown on who is in that group, what different departments and divisions are in that group?
Yeah, we have about 6 departments that are within the EEOA group. That's just the acronym for Electrical Engineering and Operations. We have the Reliability, Compliance, and Electric Planning group. Our Maintenance and Operations, which consists of our Substation, Electronics, and Metering group. And then we have our Line Engineering, Substation Engineering, Line Department, and our Power Control Center.
All right. And the Power Control Center, if any of our listeners are interested in finding out more about that, they can go back to episode 19 of the TID Water and Power Podcast and hear Adam Labuga talk a little bit more about the Power Control Center and what goes on there. Okay, so when we're thinking about our electric infrastructure, what sort of considerations are made for planning for capital projects, investing in infrastructure? How does that work?
Yeah, there's 4 main areas. And the first thing that we always resort to is reliability. We want to ensure that our customers receive safe and reliable power. Load growth is one of the biggest things, where we want to ensure that we can accommodate future load that's growing within the service territory. Capacity is another, ensuring that we have district-wide capacity and also capacity within our circuits to supply to the local areas that are seeing some of those load growth. And lastly, it's the regulatory compliance aspect of it for for capital projects.
Okay. If you're good with it, let's kind of tackle each one of those in depth, one at a time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So let's start with load growth. When we say load growth, what do we mean by that? How does the district define load growth?
Yeah, load growth is defined by, in essence, new service that's required at the district. For example, new subdivisions or large commercial developments, or you may have a new Walmart that's coming in or something of that nature is considered for load growth. But also, we really don't look at it this way for our homes is our new TV, our fridges, or anything that we add on to our load at home is considered a small loading growth, but not to where we would make big capital improvements. But that is a component of our load growth that we look into.
Sure. And I would imagine if you're factoring that multitudes of households across the district are adding little bits of load, eventually that adds up to something.
Absolutely. And we did see that this last year. So significant increase, which we'll probably dive into a little bit later.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So we know this load growth is coming, or we're anticipating it. How does the district actually go about forecasting that load growth?
Yeah, so our administration will work with our power supply administration, and they'll work together in defining on what would be our load growth for the next year, 5 years, 10 years down the line. And on average, what they kind of see is with the projections that we have within our service territory, it's about 5% increase that we see. And that's like a standard increase, not to see, the highs and lows, and which we'll get into some of those discussions because they are challenging in regards of forecast. But we also work with our local agencies, so our cities, counties, to identify their planning that they've done. So, for example, the city of Turlock has the Turlock West Side Development Plan. I believe it's called the WISP. I know the acronym. And in that, we developed a substation called Washington Substation to accommodate that future load growth that's happening in Turlock. It was also identified as a key area that was going to see some significant growth within the district.
Okay, great. And then how does TID account for both short-term as well as long-term load growth?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. In regards to short-term, those are projects that come to us from, say, developers that are coming in and they're looking to, say, for example, put in a commercial development, a complex that's coming in place. Those are easily said and done where we can accommodate to see if the local circuits have enough capacity. But long-term load growth, that's a little bit of a challenge to understand, okay, if we have a 5% increase, what does that equate to? Do we need to do some capital expenditures for large transmission projects, distribution substations? So that has a lot to do with our transmission planning group. And so our transmission planning group will work very closely to understand what limitations are on our system and then what could we do in the long term. So we put together a 10 and a 20-year capital plans that address these items for our long-term solutions. And within our 5-year capital plans, we address a lot of the short-term load forecast discussions.
Okay, great. That makes sense. All right. So there's a lot of talk these days about electrification, whether that's in your home, you're replacing your gas stove with an electric stove, or whether that's in a more commercial environment. What does TID see with this trend, and how does that impact our operations here?
Yeah, electrification, as you mentioned, is a huge topic here and within the state, not just the district itself, but it is a challenge nonetheless. For EVs, it's one of those things of when we design for a subdivision, homes are typically not having that type of load, 10, 15 years ago. And so that standard home now is going to see an increase of loading. So we have to go back and look to see if we need to retrofit transformers or new conductor to put larger conductor to take in account for the additional load. But in the commercial aspect of it, where people are going to be removing their gas units for their steam and so on and so forth, going into different than the electrification aspect of it, that really increases our load factor. So we're trying to work with our large commercial customers to kind of understand their roadmap. And that roadmap will help us define where we need to go. But essence, if we look to say that electrification, if it's a full move, everybody's removing their gas water heaters to electric heaters, it can, essence, almost double our load.
Wow.
And it's a huge thing. But obviously, it's not going to happen, all overnight. We're going to have some good planning sectors here for addressing these issues. And we're working on some large items here right now, but it is still an uphill battle.
Okay. All right. And I look forward to getting into what some of those large items are as we work our way through the podcast. And I'm glad you brought up the EV trend that's going on right now. So in theory, the sale of combustion engine cars ends in 2035, which means we're likely going to see an uptick in the number of electric vehicles in our service territory. What does that mean specifically for TID in planning for that kind of an increase?
Yeah, a lot of the new subdivisions will have to, or which we are currently doing, but what it means, there will be more transformers within a subdivision, typically on average, depending upon the demand of a home size. And there's a lot of nuances there and coincidental factors of how many times does everybody turn on their piece of equipment at any given time. It's typical 8 to 10 homes per transformer. That's, the old standard. But with new EVs moving forward, you can say in half of that. So basically 5 to 6 homes per transformer. So that's an increased cost for our customers in regards to that because of electrification. But we have to meet these challenges with these additional infrastructure improvements. The other challenge that we're going to face is in the future, when is the right time for someone to charge their EV? Every time, we have the Teslas, for example, have a really good, strong network of their superchargers that come through. And as customers utilize them, are where they're going to be charging at their house. It's a different dynamics. As the progress happens more in the EV sector, it may change the way how customers charge their vehicles. But currently, how we see it is customers will come home, charge their vehicles at home, and then, what time does that happen? And what that'll occur is our system peak will start moving, where typically, let's just say we have a peak around 3 to 4 or 5 p.m., right? That's kind of our zone where we really have it. Well, now the system will not take a break because every home's going to have an EV, and now their charging is going to happen at 9 p.m. And then all of them are going to be charging at 9 p.m. And it's a huge suck on the system of, taking a load hit. So a lot of that, we're going to have to work on how do we smoothen that out? How do we make sure that we have the supply and the capacity on our system to account for this new change that's happening? So our planning group, I got to give credit there. They're taking a lot of big steps and putting together capital improvement plans to address that. And it's a large endeavor. But we're planning ahead and doing our best so we can be in front of it.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of moving parts, and with these new kind of trends that are coming on, there's no data yet to kind of guide you. So it's really just kind of taking it as it comes and processing the information that's available at hand. Yeah,
and we're working with the county. Stan Cog has put together some good data points about, hey, where would be the next supercharger installed and where you should look to make your infrastructure improvements. And those are guiding documents that we review. But it's always a challenge about, hey, on our two major highways within our territory, we got 99 and we have I-5. Where's the big chargers going to be at? That's always one of those things that we're struggling with. Where should the capacity increase? So we're focusing on those big corridors that, okay, could we build substations nearby or larger feeders to have more capacity for these big, large chargers coming in? So our focus is going to be around that for the big, large superchargers, and then also focusing on the charging at the home that's going to be in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. Thanks for that. All right. So we mentioned that the whole electrification as a movement is gaining momentum. What other trends are you seeing in terms of load growth?
Yeah, we've seen some interesting things happen in the past. Typically we've had development would be, say, a megawatt or two that we'll see. But now we're seeing large developers coming into the service territory, 5, 10, and some points are 50 to 100 megawatts. And they're project specific, where we can't discuss like who they are. They have special names, and they're coming in to see if they can move into the district. And there's other items, right? It's not just the electric supply. There's also water, things that they're working on to see if this area is best for them to put in their new development. And those have been a struggle for us because that's not normal for the district, where we're seeing some large, the biggest ones we've seen is almost 100 megawatt load.
Wow.
And that's significantly high. So we would have to pivot very soon of how we would address it. There's always that discussion, well, TID, do you have the generation and the transmission infrastructure to support? And that will work with the developer to see, yeah, we can get there. Obviously with time, can't build everything overnight, and we'll have to do something to address their capacity needs and their production. But we work very closely with the county in those large projects. And then our customer service department works very well in being our representative in those large discussions. And we work very closely with that team as well.
Great. And I just want to give a little bit of perspective for our listeners. So last year we hit a new peak load, which was 735 megawatts. And so you're seeing now more of a trend of these 50 and even 100 megawatt developments coming forward or approaching the district. So that's a significant increase in just one project to add on to our existing load. So I just wanted to kind of give that perspective that's a big jump.
It is, and I'm glad you brought that up. And it is one of those big things that at 735, and that's a new system peak for us. And that year was a challenging year, nonetheless. It was for the state. And when you see larger projects like this, then there's discussions about capacity. So no, I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay, so knowing that, some of these large projects may come to fruition, not all of them do, but, a handful of them could, how does that affect our planning?
Yeah, those are kind of the outliers where we're going to have our standard normal load growth with in combination of electrification challenges that we have. But these larger projects are one-offs. And so we'll try to plan accordingly to put together a plan for these developments to come in place when they come to fruition, and then ensure that we have the right generation capacity and transmission import limits to bring in the power to supply these developments. But in short, they're outliers in that regard for our standard forecasting. Okay.
And you actually raised the question earlier, does TID have the resources to accommodate this size of customer?
When it comes to large sectors like this, it also depends on the demand that they have, what time of day is their load. And depending on that, there's some challenges. So, short answer is it depends on those things. But in the regards of getting capacity, the district, we're nimble enough. We're a balancing authority. So we will be able to pivot as need be. But with time, right? If we need to put more iron in the ground, for lack of better words, that construction time would require for us to do things differently. But we have limitations, no doubt, based on our capacity or generation needs. But we can always make some adjustments to make the necessary changes.
Yeah. And I think you raise an interesting point that I would want our listeners to consider as well, is that demand is different in each of these different projects or developments, right? You could have some development that has a 24-hour operation. You could have others that has peaks and valleys throughout the day of when they use that power. So that's another thing that the district would have to take into consideration.
Yeah, and that's what I was mentioning, is depending on how the customer utilizes their power. If it's certain times of the day, that might be challenging. Like when we had the big heat wave come in, it was a challenge statewide that you couldn't turn on certain things, and we were asking people to do their part to reduce the load in the state. But nonetheless, those are challenges that we'll work closely with that development.
Mm-hmm. So how does a subdivision type of development compare to kind of what we've been talking about as far as a new commercial or industrial development as far as load growth is concerned?
I'll use the city of Patterson. There's a lot of development happening in the city of Patterson for the residential. They'll put together certain areas that are deemed and zoned for residential, and we'll start building networks around those subdivisions to ensure that we have the capacity, but also the reliability. The reliability is a key component for our customers. I mean, we really tout that here at the district. We want to provide that safe and reliable power, and we want to ensure that the lights are always on, even if there's a storm coming through and we need to build a sector of the system to where we can shift our power. We want to ensure that our system is designed as such. So as a subdivision comes through, we'll be putting a lot of that in mind, that the reliability aspect of it is at the forefront. And when it comes to the big, large commercial development, those are interesting because you may have a certain development that has its own capacity needs, where you have to have a certain line segment, that would provide only power to them. And so they may not have the reliability as other areas. So if you may have a large commercial development comes in and they have multiple sources to that development, they may have a different reliability aspect of it. So commercial developments are a little bit more challenging in that regard.
Okay. So when TID is considering some of these new subdivisions, residential subdivisions, like you mentioned out in the Patterson area, do we plan for a certain amount of redundancy to help maintain reliability?
Yes, we do. I would say every single one of our feeders that we have always have a tie back to multiple different substations. So we can always have the capacity to feed our customers. So if one feeder out of one substation needs to be de-energized for example, maintenance, the other two substations that are attached to that one feeder can provide supply. So we have that redundancy there. We try to make that every circuit has a loop. and nothing is a radial. There are some tap lines that are off, say, a main feeder line is what we call it. Those might be radial feeds, but they may be some tap lines that are looped as well, that you could have a loop feed to it. So in short, yes, we provide loop feeds to all our feeders to ensure that there's a reliability component whenever there's say an emergency, there's a car burst pull, or when it comes down to a maintenance requirement, we can continue to provide service.
Awesome. Okay, thanks for that. All right. So we've heard in a number of different industries that projects and different programs are being affected by supply chain issues. Is that something that is affecting TID projects?
Yes, significantly. And it's an industry-wide issue, in particular in terms of transformers. Transformers have gone up in cost and have gone up in lead times where we've never seen it before. We've tried to, hedge a lot of this in advance to where if a developer comes in and they make the payment, they have a project that's moving forward, we'll try to accommodate as best we can. But we've had our own challenges in procuring the transformers to where if you were able to get a transformer in, say, 18 to 20 weeks, now it's taking almost a year.
Wow.
To get him. So we're trying to be a little bit proactive in getting these transformers here. We're looking at other opportunities to even look at, say, refurbished transformers or things that we can put back in to meet our customers' demands. And obviously still giving that reliable service. People talk about a refurbished transformer. Is it still going to be reliable or not? But we've got, additional warranties on them that we get from the manufacturer. So, and it's not just transformers. We're talking about conductor, even connectors. One of those biggest challenges, connectors. And one other thing that was interesting to me in recent, we had challenges of getting insulators for our cross arms on our poles. Huh. They were on back ordered, and we had to order them from an area that I was very interested to hear where it had to come from. But our purchasing staff and warehouse staff, they're trying to do the best they can. And it is a challenge, like I said, it's an industry-wide issue. We're starting to see some changes come along, but since the whole industry is seeing this, it's going to take some time.
Sure.
And all the developers understand it because they're seeing the same pains as well.
Yeah, absolutely. TID isn't the only district that's looking for transformers and other materials. It's across the nation, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So with some of these delays in getting the materials that we need, how are we dealing with those impacts? Are we just telling people no? Are we kind of giving them a best guess timeline and kind of pushing those projects out a little bit? What are we doing with those?
Yeah, for the subdivisions and some of the commercial projects, we've kind of set together some milestones that we can meet, and those that we're not able to, we're informing them. So we've sent out letters to all the big developers in the area that the district is facing this challenge, and then we'll work with them, giving them advanced timing as much as we can so they can accommodate based on their construction schedules. So we've been keeping that abreast of it. But as for the district, we've had our challenges in regards to our substation projects. The big, large transformers at substations, those have been also seeing a long lead time, and we're in the process of rebuilding Roading substation. We want to add more capacity at our Roading substation, which is located in City of Ceres. That transformer there, we're looking to add more capacity for the electrification push and a lot of needs there within the City of Ceres. But we had to move that. We were planning to do that project last year, but with delays, it's going to be moving another 2 more years. So we're just trying to stay as best we can in front of this issue, working with our suppliers to get our equipment here. But yeah, everything has been moved back at least a year or 2, depending on the magnitude of the project.
Sure. And with regard to the customers that we're working with, like you said, they're seeing this in multiple facets of their development, not just in working with TID. So it's probably something that, unfortunately, people are growing accustomed to.
Yeah, it's this unfortunate thing within the whole industry. And, some are having their own financial challenges as well. They have their own commitments, so they're trying to get things moving. But yeah, it's an industry-wide issue that everyone's feeling the pain.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so we've got a handle on load growth. Now let's talk about capacity. When we say capacity, what do we mean by that, and how is that different than load?
Yeah, capacity is kind of looked in two different areas. One is system capacity. So when we talk about, hey, TID, do you have the capacity to serve this load? Meaning, do you have the generation and transmission resources? That's one. Since we're a balancing authority, we have to look at our generation versus load and ensuring that we can supply that. And so that's at one level. And the other level is at the local capacity. So as I mentioned earlier, we talked about like the city of Patterson growing. And do we have the capacity at our substations to provide service in that area? So, for example, each substation have about 8 feeders, as an example. And does one of those feeders have the capacity to serve, say, another big, large Amazon warehouse that may come in? That's just an example. Nothing's coming in right now. But as just a discussion point there, that's how we really look at it, as a localized capacity needs and a system capacity. And then those are defined through our assessments. So we do perform our transmission and distribution assessments that'll define where our constraints are within the system, and then where areas that we need to add more capacity to, larger conductor for the increased load that we have. So that is done annually, where we'll look through both the transmission and distribution systems, and then we'll work closely with our Power Supply Administration that if we do see a need within the next 5 to 10 year horizon, if we have any generation needs. So we'll look to that group to say that we should have some projects slated in certain years if we need to add more generation needs. But our plan, like I said, I tout our planning team. They put a lot of effort in putting those transmission and distribution assessments together, but they work very closely with our line engineering team, our substation team, to identify those and move those projects along as we need to have the capacity.
Right. So as we mentioned, last year, September to be specific, we hit a new peak load of 735 megawatts. Is that an anomaly, or is that kind of what TID is considering sort of the new normal? And either way, what's needed to meet that kind of capacity demand? Yeah,
September of last year was a very interesting time frame for not just the district, but for the state. We had a large heat wave coming through, and in my mind, it's 40 megawatts above our normal that we've seen. So it'd be an anomaly in that regard. We had a big weather front that came in, basically the heat wave. Would we see that type of heat wave again? Maybe so. So it's hard for us to predict that this is going to be a new normal, but we do need to be ready for it, in the essence of having the capacity to serve our customers. And we've done well in that regard of having the capacity to do so, the ability to serve that load even more in the future. So the district is well resourced in that regard and has the transmission and distribution capacity to far exceed the 735. But that is a challenging thing, because we do want to have a little bit of cushion, I'll be honest, where whenever you have these anomalies that come out of another 40 megawatts, well, could we continue to supply that? And what happens if we don't? Do we then stress the system to ensure the lights are on, or is there something that we need to do to reduce our loads, right? There's a demand response programs. There's a lot of things in the future that we're going to be looking at. But it is one of those things that we work with our planning group very closely. That is this a anomaly or a new normal? And as of right now, it's deemed as a anomaly because we've never seen a big jump like that.
Sure.
And the state has seen some big challenges as well. We'll continue to monitor it, but as I mentioned, we are always looking to increase our capacity at the district because we are growing. And with the challenges that we're facing for reliability, we want to ensure that the capacity continues. So there will be projects in the future that we're working on to address that.
Sure. Well, and you've been very generous throughout our talk this morning about giving credit to the different departments that, go into the planning and the resourcing and making sure that we have the generation and the transmission to have the capacity to serve our customers. But I think that really illustrates it, is that we had this 40 megawatt jump, which is, unprecedented by what we had seen in the district's history, but TID was still okay. While we were hearing from the state that there could be rolling blackouts, brownouts, whatnot, we it was touch and go for a while, but we felt really good about being able to provide for our customers. So I think that says a lot about how TID prepares for that reliability. All right. So we talked about kind of how we forecast load growth. How do we plan to meet future capacity needs?
Yeah, Constance, that's where our electric planning group will work very closely with our power supply administration. And in particular, they're in the process of building an integrated resource plan. And that'll be for 2023 about what needs we'll have generation, transmission within the service territory, and potentially even resources outside. So we can utilize our transmission assets, very similar to our wind farm that we have up north, and bringing that power back in. But one note that we, do need to have some consideration is renewables. That's one of the biggest discussions here within the state and actually the nation as well, is adding more renewable resources, such as like solar and batteries. And there's discussions about, we need to be at a net zero in the future, and is solar the solution to get us there? And that's a challenge. The area that we're in, we don't have the solar radiants that are here. It's best to have down south, but you do need to be able to have local support within your balancing authority. So that's one of the challenges that we face, that where would be the best solution area for us to have these renewables installed within the territory to serve our customers reliably. That's one of the biggest challenges. As you can imagine, a few weeks ago, we've had this big rainstorm coming in. We had no sun. So how would the solar plant be able to provide the power as our WEC power plant does, our Walnut Energy Center? So those are the challenges there that our planning group works very diligently through. And it's a struggle. That is solar the solution? I think it is a part of the solution. It's not the solution. Mm-hmm. You'll have to have, a combination of generation resources in the future to meet those future needs.
I'm glad that you mentioned renewables, actually, because the next question I wanted to ask you was regarding regulatory compliance factors that TID has to account for in planning for capacity. For example, I know we have a compliance obligation to meet with regard to renewables, but what factors in from that front when planning for capacity?
Yeah, as a balancing authority, we do have our compliance obligations to NERC, which is a North American Electric Reliability Corp, which then has a subsidiary of WEC, which is the Western Electric Coordinating Council. They have set requirements for a balancing authority of how we need to ensure we have balance our load and our generation. I mean, this is very simplistic terms I'm bringing in. It's very challenging for our teams to address this, but in simplistic items, that's one of the biggest challenges we have, is balancing our load and our generation and transmission, where everything kind of falls within. And WEC and NERC really have those standards in place to ensure we're able to provide reliable power to our customers, and the system doesn't have any challenges ensuring that that service could not be provided. In regards to the big push for electrification and your renewable items, electrification isn't part of a standard in that regard, and renewables have their set standards of how that would supply to the utility.
So these regulatory bodies that you mentioned, like NERC, are continuously updating their standards. How do these changes then impact TID's planning?
Yeah, so the standards that WEC sends out to all the balancing authorities within the West, they'll be updated annually. Some are done every 6 months, depending upon the changes that we need to adhere to. For example, one of the changes that we had to address was supply chain. Where do we receive our supplies for our relays? So where are they built? Are they built within the U.S. or are built outside? And making sure that we have the standards in place to ensure that there's no compromising in those equipment. So those happen regularly. In regards to the standards themselves, we're audited from WEC every 3 years. We're actually in the process of being audited now. The district is as a balancing authority. So that's done every 3 years. Every one of our standards is up for a compliance audit. And so we try to stay ahead of it and working very closely with the WEC team to ensure that we best understand the new changes and provide our comments and inputs as best we can within their committees that they have identified with those changes. So it's an ever-changing environment as the compliance aspect of it, but the district's team does very well in staying abreast of those issues.
Okay, so we've already mentioned reliability quite a bit because that is such an important thing for TID. But let's dive into it a little bit more. And I want to start by actually congratulating the district for earning the RP3 designation from the American Public Power Association. And that designation recognizes TID's dedication to operating an efficient, safe, and reliable distribution system. So congratulations on that commendation.
Yeah, the team does an excellent job of ensuring that we can provide that safe, reliable power to our customers. And we're excited to receive that recognition and hope to continue to receive it.
Okay, so as hard as we try to be as reliable as possible, we know that outages still occasionally happen. What are some of the typical causes of outages in our service territory?
Yeah, I mean, those are some of the items are very challenging in regards to third party, and third party can consist of like a car versus pole that happens. You can have weather. Weather is one of the biggest components. As we saw a couple of weeks ago, we had a huge rain front coming in, weather front with a ton of rain, which have caused some significant pole damages and actually underground electrical infrastructure failures. So that occurs. Obviously, critters may come in, avian issues that. They're a small component of it, but there are some. And as I mentioned earlier, electrical infrastructure failures do occur. Not everything is built to live forever, but we do have a pretty robust maintenance program where we inspect our facilities regularly. But there are those times where equipment does fail. And one of those other challenges are mylar balloons. Things that are caught in our overhead lines could cause some outages as well.
Okay, that's a good point. I don't think people often think about mylar balloons as being a cause of outages, but they definitely are. All right. And how do our outage response times kind of compare across the industry, either local or nationwide?
Yeah, we fare pretty well in the way how the industry goes through and looks at how a utility is performing is on our ability to have a response time to our customers. And it's our SAIDI numbers. And those SAIDI numbers is an industry-wide designation that's utilized. And we're very well within it. We have a rolling 5-year within our strategic plan to keep it at a certain level. Off my head, I believe it's 75. I'll have to go back and validate, but it's 75 minutes. But we stay well within under that. We've done pretty well in that regard. And it is a testament to our team to be able to make those repairs very efficiently and get our power restored quickly in those instances where power is lost.
Okay. And I know SAIDI is an acronym. Can you tell us what that stands for?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have mentioned that earlier. So that was the System Average Interruption Duration Index.
Okay, very good. So what does TID do to mitigate these outages?
Yeah, when we look to see if there's, for example, multiple outages that we see in certain areas, for example, if there's a car versus pole that happens in a certain location and it's occurred multiple times over, say, the course of, 5 years or something like that nature, we call those hotspots, and to see if we need to relocate a certain line to move that away from a certain corner, or should we underground a facility? And we look at that very religiously when we're developing our capital plans, or in particular our distribution plans, because a lot of distribution poles would be impacted. That's when we look at that very closely. So in our capital planning process, our team will look at those hotspots and then identify those as projects and work with our line engineering team to put together that capital project.
Okay. And what other sort of things does TID do to enhance reliability?
Yeah, we have, as I mentioned earlier, there's our maintenance program. So we obviously patrol our lines annually. We do a comprehensive, intrusive inspections of our wood poles. We look for decay to see if there's any issues there and replace as need be. We have a underground cable replacement program where we're replacing direct buried cable. And many years ago, we used to install direct buried cable not in a conduit. And as they age and water saturates through the soil, that cable degrades and it'll cause an outage. So we have a program in place to where we'll put in conduit in those certain subdivisions. They were mainly in subdivisions where that system was in place. And we start putting in conduit and cable as we see a certain age group of those conductors. It's surprising that we see a 38-year lifespan.
Wow.
And there's about a 30-year lifespan on that. So we have a program to address those subdivisions as we make progress there.
Great. And how do you determine which line or infrastructure upgrades happen first or in what order?
Yeah, the big front is reliability. And I keep touting reliability because we want to ensure that we can meet that need. And also then it comes to capacity. When a new customer comes in place, as I've mentioned, for example, an Amazon or a large customer, that now has an impact on that system. And so we want to ensure that there's a capacity there for that new development that's coming in place, but also the reliability as well. So there'll be multiple line segments that may be upgraded just for this one customer because they're impacting the whole grid.
I see.
So we'll work with the team to develop those capital projects as we move forward.
So in the way that one customer may impact a whole bunch of customers.
Yeah, because there may be no capacity or there may be a limited number of capacity on that certain line segment. And obviously the developer has their own set of requirements from the district as they are maybe required to install certain facilities within their footprint. But we may be required based on their capacity needs as well.
Okay. And what would you say is the biggest change in making these determinations that you've seen during your time with the district?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The changes have happened in the sectors growing very quickly. Development is coming on very quick that we're starting to see. We had the big push in the residential timeframe, right? The 06 through 08 kind of timeline where a lot of things were happening, and that happened again. So where a lot of residential developments are coming through, a lot of commercial developments. So our team is challenged to meet the customer needs and the timelines. The timelines are becoming very tight to meet those deadlines that we have imposed on ourselves and our customers have too. So we want to make sure we hit both items there. But that's kind of been the big thing. The wave is what we're riding through right now. And it's been a challenge to stay abreast of it. Obviously, supply chain has been an issue in itself to meet those demands. But yeah, it's kind of been the wave of development.
Okay, so TID is regularly assessing capacity. We're anticipating load growth. We're conducting a regular evaluations of our infrastructure and then building out these plans accordingly. But we don't just sit on that information. There has to be projects that come out of all of this planning. What sorts of projects would this lead to?
Yeah, there's a whole host. As I mentioned, our planning team works very closely with our substation engineering group, our line engineering group to identify these projects. And when they have and also looking at system stability. Sorry, that's another key component as well. They'll then put out the needs there. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, our roading substation in the city of Ceres, we're looking to add more capacity. This is kind of in that area where there's that new Walmart that's been built, and we're looking to expand there. So we're trying to stay ahead of these projects, building the infrastructure needed to meet those future needs. So that's kind of the projects there for substations. And then we also have our distribution and transmission upgrades. There's some issues to where you have certain contingencies that happen. For example, if one transmission line, or we call it all elements in service, I'll go back, where every transmission line is in service. And let's just say you have one contingency happen, a line trips based on a fault or a certain issue on that line, and the breaker opens up, and now that line is now open and de-energized. Well, how does now the system move those electrons, for power flow? We'll always look to see if there's any upgrades that need to happen on the transmission lines themselves. For example, many have probably seen a lot of our line trucks working off of Monte Vista. We had a pretty large project. It's called the Fairground College Gear Project. There's 3 substations that we're working on upgrading our transmission line. And that was based on certain contingencies that occurred on the system that would overload that potential, that transmission line in certain contingencies. And it's not overload like it's going to fall down or anything of that nature, but overload the system to where it's going to require us to do certain actions. So we'll always look to see, we need to make some actions there. So we replace that conductor with a much larger conductor that has more capacity, and you can run it at a certain temperature and a lot of good stuff for us to have some flexibility in running our generation and transmission network. So those projects are identified there. And as I mentioned earlier, distribution system is also identified by our load growth and our capacity needs, and certain, let's just say, abilities to backfeed certain areas is identified through that distribution assessment. And then there are some regulatory items there that we looked at. As I mentioned earlier, stability. If there's a system stability issue, we may need to have certain type of protection schemes in place to allow us to address these stability issues.
What's a protection scheme? What do you mean by that?
Oh, sure. So that's on our relays, which identify faults on our system, and then that'll send signals to our breakers to operate. So there's certain levels of schemes that you can have. I won't go into the technical details. We'll sit here for days if we want to go into that. But yeah, it's just certain schemes that we have to implement that would be, say, fast operating to get the breakers to operate in the essence of a fault that occurs on a system, so you don't have a grid collapse, or what we call it is a stability issue. So that's what that is. There's other things as for regulatory, for example, SF6. It's one of those big things that we looked at, that certain breakers that we have this gas in there. And it's a great insulating means to ensure we're able to open the breaker in a certain time frame. And it's a really good insulator. But the challenges there are there's nothing there to replace it right now. And so for certain voltage classes, we do. For 69 kV, there is the industry has built a replacement of this type of breaker style, but the larger ones for 115 kV and 230 kV, those are still being developed by the industry. So we're working closely with the regulators and identifying these issues, but we're trying to stay ahead of it by maintaining those breakers, making sure that they can continue to operate, and when the time for replacement comes, is when the industry has an availability to replace it with a new system.
Okay. All right. So we touched on substation upgrades, distribution and transmission upgrades, and then regulatory or system stability projects that all come out of the planning that TID does with regard to providing reliable service. I want to jump back up to substation upgrades real quick. You mentioned the Roding substation. Are there any others that would fall under this type of project that you want to mention?
So the other one was other good projects to identify for the listeners is like our Tuolumne substation upgrade. Don Pedro, right? We're getting new units up there that are going to increase capacity for us, and there are some challenges that we face to bringing that down to our networks through our transmission line. So our Tuolumne substation requires to have some upgrades done there to allow for that increased capacity to be utilized in a fashion that gives us some operating flexibility. So that's one to highlight. We've done some refurb of certain stations. We worked at our Crow's Landing substation just recently. We had some new breakers installed there and expansion there. Other projects that were done, our Washington substation, as I mentioned, that was based on the City of Charlotte WISP, and so that's there. But those are some just to highlight. Other stuff that probably people have seen in our service territory is our 230 paint projects. It looks like a huge aerial monument that's up there, where we're actually recoating those towers. So those towers are built in 1976, and they were painted. And as you can imagine, paint does go bad and starts failing. And the structural integrity of those towers have not been compromised, but it's more so we're seeing a lot of surface rust on them. And so we've had a pretty long project, about 6 years in the making, that we are recoating those poles. They come from our Wesley substation. down to our Walnut substation, and also to Modesto Irrigation District, and their substation is called Parker Substation. So we're looking to finalize that project hopefully at the end of this year. The challenges there are, it's much more cost effective to recoat those poles and keep ensuring that they're up to date in lieu of replacing them. Replacement costs are, as you can imagine, with the commodities and lead times and of that nature now, supply chain issues, it's in our best interest to continue to repaint those poles.
Okay, very good. And then what about other distribution and transmission projects that are going on within the district?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we have a underground replacement program where we're replacing conductor and putting in conduit in the ground. Where we can install conduit, we will, and then coming back with cable as identified. So our main directive is to have the conduit in place. We use our boring contractors to provide that service for us. And then our line crews will come after and replace the conduit there. Now, we have about 120 miles of direct buried cable. As you can imagine, that is going to take some time for replacement. So we've identified key areas, and there are some challenges there about, priorities and getting things going. So our team has about maybe 10 projects that they go through a year, depending upon that year. Some may be more, some may be less. Less meaning because there's a large project. And so there's a lot of moving components there. But we try to get that going as best we can. And the other one that I mentioned earlier was our intrusive pole inspections, a 10-year cycle where we use it's like a drill in essence. It's called a resistograph. It's like a little small number 2 pencil that gets drilled into the base of the pole, and it tends to see if there's any decay. And so we'll identify that. So then either the pole needs to be rebraced, or can it be refumigated, or we'll just replace it. And that also comes down to looking at our aerial components as well. So we'll do our annual patrols of our lines where our service division will send out our troubleshooters to inspect the lines and then identify if there's any issues. And then we do perform detailed inspections as well. So those detailed inspections where we'll look at connectors, your pins, your insulators, and the whole host of things to see if there's any items that need to get replaced, transformers and the like. And we also do underground inspections as well for your residential subsurface systems and anything that's in a residence or a commercial development for your transformers, the big green boxes like everybody likes to call them.
Yeah. It sounds like you guys have a lot going on.
Yeah, a lot of moving pieces, a lot of action is going through every year.
No doubt. Are there any other projects that are taking place within the district that our listeners might be interested to know about?
Yeah, so we have the project that's not just infrastructure, it's our outage management system. And that's to benefit our customers and our community, and mainly to be able to utilize our AMI system, our metering system that we have, our smart meters. This project is going to allow us to take our smart meters. Our smart meters will be able to tell our control center, hey, I just lost power. And then that gets diverted into our outage management system, which will be able to identify real-time outages to our power control center. So in essence, a customer wouldn't have to call. We would know beforehand. And so we really want to capitalize on our metering infrastructure to utilize this system and to be able to have a better customer facing solution. As of right now, many that have gone onto our outage management map, our outage management website, at our TID.org. It doesn't have a map. It has more so streets and areas and number of customers that are impacted, which is still very valuable information for our customers. And we have a restoration time. We're going to be able to put this on a map setting to understand, okay, where am I located within this area? So that is a big project. I'm excited to have that project moving forward. It is a challenge too, because it brings in multiple areas. Our IT team is very integral to this. Our GIS team, which is the very big component to this project. And then obviously it has some integrations to our customer service information system. So it's going to bring everything in and be able to have a great tool for not just our district operators, but to our customers as well.
Great. Oh, that sounds really exciting. So again, as you detailed for us, there are a number of projects that are currently going on or that are planned to take place in the next few years. But in looking ahead to the future, what do you see as some of the projects that the district will undertake to enable TID to continue to provide power so reliably?
Yeah, we have identified certain projects in our 10 and 20-year capital plans, but we're starting to see that we probably have to move things more sooner than that. And that's, for example, our needs in Patterson. Patterson has seen significant load growth and continues to. And we will be building a new substation within Patterson. I haven't identified the exact location, but that's something that we're looking in the near 5-year horizon. Including our Eustic substation that we're looking at. This is in the city of Ceres. So we call it Eustic because it'll be somewhere on Eustic on the road. Okay. And so it may not even be called that, but it'll be in Ceres. And that's to take some of the load off of some of the substations that are there. So there's support coming in that area. And then we're also looking to enhance our transmission interconnections outside of our territory, so that how we touch the rest of the Western grid. So we're looking to upgrade some of the transmission projects. We've identified a handful of those that'll provide us additional capacity, more abilities to have import and export capability. So those are kind of right in the 10-year horizon that'll be coming in play. So there's some significant capital improvement, but at the end, this is all to ensure that we provide reliable service to our customers. And as you mentioned earlier, Constance, we hit our system peak of 735, and that's a credit to our teams putting together a great capital plan, a great vision in regards to our planning discussions and projects that have been put forth. And we want to continue with that and being in this position to allow to serve our customers, not just today, but 20, 30 years down the line, that we have a system in place to address that.
Awesome. Well, you kind of rolled right into my last question for you, which is, we know that the load used by our customers is going to continue to grow and that TID will have to make those capacity adjustments. How well would you say TID is positioned to respond?
Yeah, currently we're positioned very well in that regard. I mean, we've, like I said, put a lot of effort in getting us to where we are today, and having the capacity, what we currently have can far exceed our customers' expectations currently. But the challenge is, electrification, EVs, how that's going to progress. We are working on those new projects coming in. But it's going to be an ever-changing environment for us. We'll have to pivot where we can to continue and to be ready for the next 30, 40 years.
All right. And I have no doubt that we will. All right. Thanks for being with us, Manjot. Appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the TID Water and Power Podcast. You can find TID on Facebook at facebook.com/TurlockID, on Instagram and Twitter at TurlockID, and on LinkedIn as the Turlock Irrigation District. I'm your host, Constance Anderson. We'll see you again next time.